Let's
The
go
broadcast
ahead
is now
and
starting.
start
All attendees are in
recording.
listen-only
If
mode.
anyone cannot hear me, just go ahead and post that to the chat box, and then let me know, and then I can certainly make some adjustments if needed. But I'm hoping everything's working okay. If everyone can hopefully hear me, that's awesome. If you can't, let me know. So, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for attending this webinar. And today's webinar lesson is called Push and Pull Navisworks Data Through Dynamo. I am going to be your presenter. My name is Liberty Longalong. I'm an application engineer at CAD Technology Center, and it's my pleasure to be sharing this presentation with you guys. Let's see. Oh, I'm hearing, oh, here's my screen. There we go. All right. Hopefully everyone can see me and hear me now. All right. Basically, this class description is going to go into 3 different types of software. We're going to look at Navisworks. We will look at Revit, as well as Dynamo that is housed inside of Revit. So we'll start with Navisworks. Navisworks has tons of functionality within the interface. I mean, you've got appearance profiler, link refresh. You can create and export and import selection and search sets. You can certainly do clash tests between the different disciplines. There are also VR-centric capabilities added to Navisworks as well. And, you've got Timeliner, where you can sequence concrete and equipment rental. You can actually sequence those items to specific geometric items within Revit or Navisworks, in this case Navisworks. You've got walkthrough capabilities, as well as workspace customization settings. There are a lot of things you can do in Navisworks. And one thing that we will be focusing on, that will be the main theme throughout this presentation, is quantification. So basically, I'm going to show you guys how this function works in Navisworks and where a lot of the nomenclature derives from. And then we can see how this data is extracted with using Dynamo from a Revit model. So we're basically extracting the same kinds of data from a Navisworks model as opposed to a Revit model. And the name of the game for this presentation is to show you guys what discrepancies we see in the output. So at the end of the day, we're going to get an Excel file through the Navisworks quantification tool. Same concept in Revit. We're going to be exporting an Excel file through the Dynamo interface, and then I'll have those items side by side next to each other, and then again we'll see the discrepancies between the different types of data. And if we need to create a future presentation on how to modify this data or customize it, let me know in the chat comments box for this presentation. So today's learning objectives include looking at your project file. For this quantification exercise, we need to look at the material information based on the family setup. So we'll be looking at walls. I'll show you more in depth here once we get into Navisworks. We'll make sure to look at 2 items or criteria needed to quantify from a contractor as well as design standpoint. Second learning objective includes placing the nodes in a sequence based on quantification data that's typically extracted within the Navisworks interface. So we will look at how Navisworks takes the data away and exports it to an Excel file, and then we'll look at how these nodes behave and what kinds of data you can combine or consolidate when we export an Excel file. And then basically this goes along more with the Dynamo workflow. We'll generate lists within Dynamo and then generate that Excel file with the information based on what has been modeled in the data set that we are about to look at here. So before I get into the actual software checklist, I just wanted to reiterate the fact that if I am in my Manage tab and I click on Dynamo, I always stress this whenever Dynamo is involved. and hopefully Dynamo will pull up a lot more quickly. Within this interface, I've got all of these packages listed. If you want to replicate what I'm doing when you're watching this video at another time, these are the packages that I've installed. You can certainly rebuild these scripts, but I would suggest downloading the packages beforehand. Oops, that's not good. All right, so the software checklist includes, since we're working with 3 types, or just Revit and Navisworks and then Dynamo. Revit, we just recently got the 2018.3 update. You can definitely check that out if you've got Revit 2018 open. At the top right corner, click on the question mark. It'll let you know what build number that you have. Now with this update, 2 versions of Dynamo Core has been installed. I like to call both versions 1.3.3 for short. Whenever I actually check that out within the Dynamo interface, you know, I've got these 2 numbers articulated, but really it's considered up to date, and we're on 1.3.3. So I'm going to go ahead and get out of that and then get back to the presentation here. And then with Navisworks Manage, same concept. Right now, this is the build that I've got. We get to that information just by doing the same process that we did within Revit. Go to About Navisworks, and then you can see your version articulated in the dialog box that pulls up. I know it's repetitive in a lot of my presentations, but I always like to stress that in order to minimize problems, corruption, any sort of issues with the geometry, just check to see if you're on the latest and greatest in regards to the build. So first we'll go and take a look at quantification within Navisworks Manage. So I'm going to go ahead and walk you guys through the process whenever I'm doing a general light quantification on some exterior walls for my model. So we've got a ton of dialog boxes here. These are the dialog boxes that I would typically use for this type of function. So we've got the selection tree, we've got properties, we've got saved viewports. I do have a separate box sometimes up for selection and search sets, but we can certainly concentrate on that kind of content for a future presentation. But let's go ahead and deep dive into quantification. So this is the quantification workbook. It's comprised of 3 tabs. You've got that quantification workbook tab, the item catalog tab, as well as the resource catalog tab. So think of it from left to right as general to specific. So, you know, you're going to have items articulated here at a general level. You're going to go into detail as to what the naming convention would be for these items for tab 1, and then you get even more specific with how these items are constructed or what resources are used to build that structure. And you'll see here in a minute what I'm talking about. But as we noticed, we've got some inactive buttons going on here. I can't necessarily set up my project because A, I don't have any geometry placed into my model, and B, there's nothing to work with here. So let me just go ahead and open up a converted file. One thing I would like to stress, and I'll go ahead and be picky with the background here, as you guys can see, and that's in the View tab, by the way. I just want some clarity and a little more light. We've got an NWC imported into the selection tree. Now, if I were to do a clash report or a clash test, I'd want to make sure that I had all of my disciplines exported out as a separate NWC, simply because of the extra amount of visual control you can apply to the different disciplines. So, I mean, this could be renamed ARC, and then I could be appending through the Home tab another discipline like mechanical or electrical or the plumbing guys. So basically, these separate line items in the selection tree are going to help me out in regards to customizing what I want to see in regards to the geometry originally created in Revit. So I've got a model loaded. I notice now that under my quantification workbook, I've got the project setup button and it's active. So I'll go ahead and click on that guy. As I click on project setup, I see that I have catalogs listed. So it looks like we've got some default out-of-the-box text files. These are housed within, actually deep within your C drive when you install Navisworks. These are your typical text files. So these adhere to materials, divisions that pertain to construction specification institute, the actual standards associated with CSI. So I believe the 48 is an updated version of the 16 uniformat. We're actually going to move forward with that in our example. You can create a new catalog based on project type. So if you're seeing consistent materials in your healthcare projects, or maybe your prisons or your schools, you can certainly create a quantification workbook based on those project materials. So we could essentially browse to a catalog that's already been created from a previous hospital project, if you will, and then we can name it hospital quantification, and then we can refer back to it the next time a hospital comes up. But for this example, I'll choose uniformat. I'll hit that to accept. I'm not going to mess with any of my measurement units. I'll keep it strictly at imperial. And then this is kind of crucial with how the Dynamo script will begin once we get to that phase of the presentation. So these are takeoff properties right here. I've got model height, model area, model volume articulated. I can certainly go to the units, change those up to whatever units I would like to have articulated when I do this quantity takeoff. But right now, I think we're going to go ahead and focus on model volume and model area and see what kinds of data will populate to an Excel file based on that criteria. So we've got the model area and the model volume. I'll go ahead and hit next. So Navisworks is letting me know, hey, quantification now has all the information required to set up your takeoff database. So just click the finish button. That's what I'll do to accept. And once I add that uniformat text file, I've got 7 categories here that I could certainly choose from and apply my geometry to for quantification. So we've got substructure, foundations, basement construction. I've got the shell here. Within that shell, we've got superstructure and exterior enclosure and roofing. And then, here are the subcategories under interiors. If you've got tons of stairs, you can quantify the amount of stairs that you have in your model. Services, this is basically going to be your different disciplines, as well as your different equipment. Maybe for facilities management or the as-built model, you'll need to quantify certain pieces of equipment just to help you out to, get some data out to the folks who do manage the facilities of a particular building type. So for this example, we're actually going to look at the exterior enclosure. Now, I've got to make sure that I know where that's located in my model here. I'm going to expand upon the walls, and I want to quantify, what areas and volume the materials will report based on the exterior walls that I choose. So I'll go ahead and click here on exterior walls. We notice that I can't change anything here under the workbook structure, but once I go to the item catalog, things are a little more specific, as I had mentioned earlier. So that WBS is actually work breakdown structure, but I have the item selected in the quantification workbook tab here. I go to the item catalog tab, it's still selected. That means I can proceed in adding new items. So I'll go ahead and add some new items. I want to just get my exterior walls. So I'll type in exterior and then, brick on CMU1, and I'm assuming it's either the canary yellow here or the brick red. And then I've got the brick on CMU2 articulated here. It's another exterior wall type, and then we've got the brick on CMU with interior finish. So basically, I'm just listing out all of my exterior walls associated with this project. We can certainly go to the resource catalog and, you know, add that exterior brick on CMU item from the item catalog and apply resources to it. So when I'm talking resources, I'm talking all the bricks that need to be shipped to the job site. Basically your installers, your setback amount, or maybe there's a limitation on, you know, where that setback is, or your environmental fee. So basically anything, any materials that are left over from the project, you know, there's a fee for that cleanup. You could definitely get that detailed here simply by adding the group, you know, by naming it your exterior walls, and then adding the resources that I had mentioned a little bit ago. So basically you can get very specific on how this information would get quantified, but for simplicity purposes, I'll go ahead and show you how this process works. So, you know, I can select all of my exterior walls here very, very easily through that selection tree up here. I can also go into my find items. I can go to my sets and manage them. I'm not going to pull up that dialog box because then I might get carried away in creating some selection or search sets and, you know, exporting that XML. But that option is there for you to select your geometry. You can be very, very specific and create your search sets based on the disciplines involved. But for right now, I'm just going to choose my geometry based on the selection tree. So I've ensured that under my item catalog, I've got my exterior walls selected, and then under my selection tree, I'm going to go ahead and quantify those items. So once I hit quantification, I get the option to take off to that naming convention that I just added to the item catalog. So I'll go ahead and take off to the exterior walls, regardless of, you know, what color the brick would be. So as a result, we've added a new work breakdown structure number, as well as generated model length, model width, model height. Where is model area? All right, model volume. Another thing you can certainly look up is the count. I will not be going into any count nodes in the Dynamo script that I've got pre-built, but you certainly can add a group of nodes to articulate the count for what you would like to quantify in Revit. So, you know, we've got model volume, we've got model area articulated. My next step is to export the quantities to Excel. Now, this is where I was talking about, you know, exporting this particular catalog for hospital projects or prison projects. You see recurring materials over and over in these jobs. It wouldn't hurt to automate your process whenever you're quantifying. And I would say this would cater more towards a design standpoint, simply because we're not getting into setbacks or environmental fees. We're actually just quantifying our geometry, and maybe there might be some QA, QC involved in recreating the original model. So after I quantify, I'll go ahead and export those quantities to Excel. So I've got some pre-created files, but I'm going to go ahead and generate this guy live here. So Navisworks, and then Navis will ask me to open the file after exporting. I noticed that everything that I have added in terms of the data is reflected here. I didn't add anything to resources, I only talked about it, so there shouldn't be anything added. But under all data, we've got these different groups for the column headers. Now I'll show you the importance of those groups. So you could basically, let's make this bigger. You could edit how your data is displayed just by toggling on and off these boxes. It's a great way to limit, you know, maybe your quantities down to certain items. You only want to know your area or your volume or your count. Well, that's what happens when we're in Navisworks. We're basically, you know, putting in the data based on, you know, specification, CSI specification standards. But there are ways of extracting this kind of data through Revit. So let's go back to the PowerPoint here. So with Dynamo, we're going to be looking at the same criteria, but we won't necessarily have the same result. So, ooh, sorry guys. I'll show you the thought process and how the nodes were placed, and then we can compare the Excel files that get generated. So I'm going to go to my Revit model here. I've already pulled up Dynamo. Getting confused here. And I'll show you guys the thought process that went into this material quantification script. So I know if you guys have been in Dynamo before, you may have previously seen other DYN scripts that have these groupings around them, as well as their functions, the applications that would apply to the geometry in Revit. But I want to actually explain these live. So, I wanted to quantify my walls. I wanted to see what I can get from choosing the wall category. And then I wanted to make sure the all elements of category node was placed so that I can actually get all of those items that belong to the wall category. Dynamo is pulling that information for me. And then the other important node that I'd like to show you guys is the element materials node. So there are certain inputs that I won't need, hence the Boolean node, and it's set at false. So I'd like to think of this guy as an on and off switch, and I certainly don't abuse this Boolean node, but for this element materials node, I just want to make sure that return paint materials is set to false, because I'm definitely not, I don't have any items that I know I painted in my model. And had I applied a paint to my walls, then this Boolean node would be unnecessary. So we see the output values here. We've got materials, material areas, material volumes. So it's not quite literal with what Navisworks pulls, but the fact of the matter is you do have that option where you could associate a square footage or volume or area based on your material name. And then under materials, we've got material areals and material volumes. So, this goes along with the items that we had to pay attention to in Navisworks. We wanted to make sure that areas and volumes were extracted when pulling the exterior walls through the quantification command. So these look a little complicated, but basically what I'm doing is I'm pulling my materials to flatten nodes so that anything associated with the materials in Revit is consolidated into one list. So basically there might be sublists for different submaterials that are involved, but basically these flattened nodes are streamlining my data. It's a lot more nodes, but I just want to make sure that, I'm not overpopulating or, adding unnecessary data that I won't really need. So basically those flattened nodes are 3 line items. The list create actually organizes those 3 line items. And then when I get to list transpose, I'm actually combining lists of data. And that's what all of these list nodes are for. It's just basically consolidating all of the data associated with these parameters or criteria for quantification. And it's parsing the information down. I've got some math sum nodes as well to add the list items, but at the end of the day, I want an Excel file. I want to make sure all my data is not just going to be all over the place. And then the last node I've got, Excel write to file. I've got another Boolean node to be set at true, so I can overwrite in case I have to run another quantification process using Dynamo, but I will overwrite that Excel file that I point to through this file path node. So I am set to manual here. I'm going to go ahead and hit run, and this might be chugging for few seconds here. But the name of the game here is to produce an Excel sheet with specific data, and it will be raw data, and you'll be very disappointed with this Excel spreadsheet. But the fact of the matter is, you know, after I run this routine, you know, this in comparison to this could mean two separate different things to different people. You know, from a design standpoint, maybe this might be better for QAing and QCing your model, is, you know, in regards to value engineering. But from a contractor standpoint, you might appreciate all the nuts and bolts that go into installing a wall, or, you know, relaying the word to your field guys. But two different kinds of data. This one does not have any units articulated, and that's where we would have to go into another group of nodes to convert the units. But the fact of the matter is, we've got some sort of organizational data here, but at the same time, this could definitely be meaningful to someone who's just, you know, getting into Dynamo, wants to find out the volumes and the areas of their listed materials. These are the listed materials that are placed in my model here, the actual RVT, but it's fairly interesting to see what different kinds of data you'll see, you know, from the same criteria. So for Navis, we get a completely different Excel file. For Dynamo, you know, it's may not be enough for someone. So, I mean, we don't even have pivot tables built in. So I wanted to end this presentation with some of the benefits I may have repeated throughout. I think there is definitely a benefit in cost analysis efficiency. You know, you can certainly create your own routine, or you can go through Navisworks if you have a license for it, and basically, you know, check your model the old-fashioned way and see if it's actually buildable, or can, you know, is it realistic with the budget, both from a contractor and a design standpoint. Another benefit I would see, and, you know, moving forward with one or the other, you can detect if objects need remodeling. I think more with the Dynamo side, you can certainly run that script, and then, you know, if certain volumes or areas of your materials aren't adding up to, you know, what was specified at the project bid, then, you know, this is where we need to go back and check out our model and just ensure that it's modeled properly, or we have the right data inputted or entered into the RVT. And then the third benefit for the day, for the webinar presentation, is there is that knowledge of quantification outside of Navisworks. So, you know, a lot of people may be apprehensive to associate quantification and Revit in the same sentence, but really, there is always a routine available that can accommodate for data that gets pulled outside of Navisworks. So we have a new survey. You guys, I'd love to hear your feedback if you've got new ideas, or if you want to expound upon, you know, the script or the DOIN. Definitely let me know in your comments. These questions are a little more specific to the presentation, so you can be as nice as you want for today. But I would really appreciate it if you guys got me some feedback so that I can improve for the next presentation. But other than that, thank you guys once more for listening in, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day.